Hello, listeners. Welcome back to the holiday edition of our Regulatory Oversight podcast, the 12 Days of Regulatory Insight. This 12-episode series focused on key highlights and trends from the past year in various areas and designed to keep our listeners informed and engaged during this holiday season. I'm back again, this time as a moderator rather than a speaker. I'm Clay Friedman, co-host of the firm's Attorney General Practice Group and a member of the Regulatory Investigation Strategies and Enforcement Practice, otherwise known as RISE, and much easier to say as RISE. Before I get started, I wanted to remind all of our listeners to visit our blog at regulatoryoversight.com, where you'll be able to listen to other episodes from not only this year, but past years, and also keep up to date on developments and changes as they occur. Today, I'm joined by my colleague, Christy Matelis, to discuss recent changes at the FTC and how those are going to influence enforcement. And I think it's kind of timely today as we record this. The FTC is back in session, coming back now that the budget has been signed, at least temporarily. So we could talk about what's coming forward in the next year. Christy, it'd be great if you say a little bit about your background.
Thank you, Clay. I'm excited to be here, and thank you for having me. I am a senior associate and a member of the firm's antitrust practice. Prior to working here, I was an assistant attorney general for the state of Utah, where I worked on several merger reviews and enforcement actions across various sectors, including technology and healthcare. I also serve as an active member of the ABA's antitrust law section and hold a leadership position there.
Excellent. Well, glad you could join us today, and we can talk about the FTC with a big focus on antitrust issues, but also touch on consumer protection issues. But where I really want to start is, who are the commissioners and what are they doing right now?
Sure, that's a great place to start because it has been a very interesting year. So the FTC is structured as a 5-member commission with no more than 3 commissioners from the same political party as the president. Earlier this year, President Trump fired the 2 Democratic commissioners, Rebecca Slaughter and Alvaro Bedoya. And right now, we currently just have 3 Republican commissioners on the commission. This is a little bit unusual. Usually, you have a full commission under, operating. And this is a little bit unusual because there's just a lot of value to having a bipartisan commission. It just makes the agency's enforcement agenda look a little bit more robust because you know that enforcement actions are vetted through members of both parties before they go out. And it just makes the commission look a little bit more robust when you do have that bipartisanship, which it's currently lacking right now.
Can they still act with just 3? Is there anything they can't do as long as they have the 3 that are in place?
Oh, absolutely. The commission can still operate. They're still operating now with just 3 commissioners. It just makes their actions look a little bit more partisan as opposed to when they do have members of the opposing party on the commission with them. But the commission has been operating at full strength, really, since those Democrats were fired back in March of this year. And it wasn't without controversy, of course. So after Bedoya and Slaughter were fired, Commissioner Slaughter and Bedoya, actually, they both challenged their terminations. Bedoya has since resigned from the commission, and he's no longer challenging his, but Commissioner Slaughter, she is still challenging her termination, and it is going to be heard before the U.S. Supreme Court in December.
So who's the current chairperson of the commission, and does that person really dictate the agenda for the commission, or do the other commissioners still have their own separate and independent authority?
The current chair is Andrew Ferguson, and he certainly plays the largest role when it comes to setting the agenda. Earlier, I think it was in September, actually, not this month, but I think it was a couple months ago, the FTC did issue a draft priorities memo, which the public was able to view and make comments on. I think they had until October 17th to comment on that publicly. But that's where the FTC says, all right, for the next 4 years, we've got a new president. Here's what our priorities are going to be in terms of enforcement. And that was issued in September. And I think that probably most of the writing was heavily done by the chair by Ferguson, as well as the White House. And I think what you're going to see there is, to be honest, I think you're going to see a lot more of the same that we had in the last administration. We're going to see a big focus on technology markets, privacy, data security, and probably a more measured approach to enforcement and rulemaking than the last administration. But in terms of sort of what are the big key areas that this administration is looking at, definitely looking at technology, privacy, and data security.
Before we jump into that, because I want to talk about those some further, is there any news or rumors about changes on the current commission with the three that are there?
There's been some recent news lately. Commissioner Holyoke has since left the Federal Trade Commission to be the interim U.S. Attorney for the District of Utah. And rumor has it that her vacancy on the commission will be filled by Ryan Bash. He currently serves as a member of President Trump's National Economic Council as special assistant to the president for economic policy. He's served in that role since January of this year. And he has a major focus on technology policy.
President Trump, he's in his second term after a 4-year pause with the Biden administration. What are we anticipating as far as enforcement trends and the approach that the FTC is going to take? Let's focus first on antitrust enforcement and what we anticipate seeing.
Sure. I mean, there was a lot of talk about this administration being different, but so far what we've seen actually is a lot of focus on the same things. And I think that administration to administration, really they're focused on addressing the things that impact everyday Americans. So what is this administration focusing on? They're focusing on things that impact American standard of living, such as healthcare, pharmaceuticals, technology. These remain the big targets of the FTC. And, this administration doesn't seem to be deviating from those sort of big ticket items.
In another similar consumer agency, the CFPB, we've seen it get dismantled to some degree or to a large degree and not focusing on much enforcement. You just mentioned how under the current Trump administration, some things really haven't changed as it relates to healthcare and technology and pharmaceuticals and stuff like that. Are you seeing signs of actual enforcement activity by the commission in those areas? And it is almost business as usual, as you mentioned.
I think it's too early to say that, the volume of enforcement actions has continued. Certainly, we thought that we actually thought that the Biden administration would be pretty active, but they were very slow to bring actions. I think they deliberated about which actions, maybe too long, and we didn't see nearly as many enforcement actions under the Biden FTC as we thought. In fact, if you measure how many enforcement actions were brought under Trump 1 versus the Biden FTC, Trump 1 actually had more enforcement actions than the Biden FTC. Now, this Trump 2, I don't know if we're going to see a duplication of Trump 1 or if this will be more in line with the Biden FTC. Time will tell. But I think for right now, we haven't seen many enforcement actions come out, only because, look, today is the first day that we're back after a 40 plus day shutdown. It also takes time for Mark Mader, one of the commissioners on the FTC. He was nominated and took his seat earlier this year. That took time. All of these things kind of delay the FTC getting up and running. Of course, there's transition time to account for. So we haven't really seen any huge enforcement actions yet, but we are seeing. It's interesting that you're looking for a comparison to the CFPB, because one thing that was kind of interesting that's come out of the FTC so far is with regard to the non-compete rule. The FTC, under the Biden FTC, the commission banned virtually all non-compete agreements, and that invalidated most non-competes with the exception of senior executives. And it also required employers to send a notice to affected workers by the ban's effective date that the non-compete would no longer be legally enforced. This was a really big headline out of the Biden FTC. I think the rule was finalized at the end of 2024 in October last year. And Commissioner Holyoke and Ferguson had dissented on the decision to issue this rule. And so what happened after, Trump took office, new FTC came in charge. Ferguson is elevated to chair. Just this September, we saw something really interesting. We saw that the FTC, not surprisingly, they voted to dismiss the commission's appeal in federal court, two federal courts, the 5th and 11th Circuit, that prohibited the FTC from enforcing its non-compete rule. So they dropped their appeals, and then, but just a day before that happened, the FTC actually filed an enforcement action against a pet cremation company for abuse of non-competes. So what is the takeaway for employers? They shouldn't interpret the FTC as necessarily retreating from non-competes. I think that it's safe to say that a ban is no longer on the table, that a Trump FTC is not going to look at kind of this sort of blanketed approach, wholesale approach to non-competes. I think they're going to take a more targeted approach and bring enforcement actions to enjoin non-competes where they restrict the labor market. So I think that's an example of sort of the change that we're going to see duplicated in other areas where they're just going to it's going to be more of a scalpel approach.
We've talked a lot about the commissioners themselves and their priorities. What about staff? Are they still there? Are they still business as usual, or has there been a significant number of changes in that area?
Well, that's a great question, Clay. I think with regards to the agency downsizing, Chairman Ferguson has discussed reducing the size of the commission. I think he has discussed maybe a 10% reduction. And I believe also the agency has experienced maybe a departure of about 60 employees since the change in administration. So I'm not sure how far off we are from where Ferguson envisions the commission and where we are naturally now that folks have left with the change in administration, and of course Doge and the fork in the roads that were offered to people in buyouts. And I'm not sure exactly where we're sitting, but I do know that quite a number of people have left the commission. And when I am working with the commission on current investigations, they're just the folks that I knew, a lot of the folks that I knew used to be there. There have just been a lot of changes and a lot of turnover, and time will tell, what numbers they end up at. But I'm sure we'll find out relatively soon because the commission does report its numbers to Congress when it has to go and request for budget. So we'll probably be hearing more about that. Certainly on the antitrust side, I haven't seen enforcement actions slow down. Even if there has been a change in terms of the staffing levels at the commission, that's not reflected in enforcement actions when I'm dealing with staff. Certainly, matters still seem to be fully staffed. The one thing that I do note is that they seem to have a lot more younger attorneys who are new to the commission or, mid-level, but the number of senior staff seems to have taken a bit of a hit. So I do want to just make that comment because I think it's important for folks to know and how that's going to impact, of course, working with the agency and working through an enforcement action.
Having dealt with mostly on the consumer side of the shop, I'm aware of some departures there. But on the other hand, I've also seen some signs of business as usual. They're still doing consumer protection enforcement. But one that caught my attention recently was the lawsuit that the FTC, together with some states, brought against Ticketmaster. Of course, as you know, last year under the Biden administration, the FTC did pass a rule that talked about both drip pricing issues from hotels, hospitality places, as well as those selling event tickets. Tell me about the lawsuit brought against Ticketmaster and what that case was about.
The core allegations in the FTC's and state AG's case against Ticketmaster Live Nation have to do with regards to bait pricing. So advertised ticket list prices that were materially lower than the actual cost after mandatory markups and fees. Another allegation was misleading ticket limits. So, public claims of strict limits while brokers allegedly exceeded them. And then coordination with brokers. So, brokers allegedly harvested tickets in primary market and then resold them at significant markups on Ticketmaster's platform.
Yeah, there's a long history the FTC has, and the states for that matter, of focusing on broker activity. And Ticketmaster used to always hide behind the brokers and say, hey, it's not us, it's the brokers. They're using techniques or whatever to get a hold of tickets, and then they're the ones that jack up the price so high. What got my attention in this particular case is that now the FTC is, wait a second, hold on, let's take a look at this relationship you have with the brokers. And also, to me, what's significant is while the state penalty ranges, as I've mentioned before on one of these blogs, usually ranges between $2,000 and $5,000 per violation. You violate an FTC rule, which this is involved on your pricing, it's $50,000 per violation. And that can add up pretty fast. One last question, Christy, is on the consumer protection side. I saw that there was a recent announcement of a settlement of Match.com. I know that was pretty acrimonious and it went to litigation for a while. What can you share with us about the settlement?
Clay, the settlement was for $14 million and it requires that Match basically disclose. And this is a lesson that the commission's been pretty consistent on, which is, disclose how a program works and make the methods of cancellation easy for the consumer. If you recall, there was under the Biden administration, there was the click to cancel rule, which is no longer enforced, but this is kind of consistent with that. And the commission, even prior to click to cancel, has been really focused on making things easy for consumers. So making it easy for them to cancel and having terms and conditions be clear and prominent and making sure that consumers understand the services that they're accessing and paying for.
Yeah, it's interesting to me in that particular case that the commission really is making a loud and clear statement, as you mentioned, not only on the disclosure side, but it's got to be easy to cancel. And I know in the lawsuit, so they talk about all the different types of barriers that the allegedly Match put in place to stop people from canceling auto renew. It reminds me going back to another century in the 1980s when .com businesses were. Hello, listeners. Welcome back to the holiday edition of our Regulatory Oversight Podcast, the 12 Days of Regulatory Insight. This 12-episode series focused on key highlights and trends from the past year in various areas and designed to keep our listeners informed and engaged during this holiday season. I'm back again, this time as a moderator rather than a speaker. I'm Clay Friedman, co-host of the firm's Attorney General Practice Group and a member of the Regulatory Investigation Strategies and Enforcement Practice, otherwise known as RISE, and much easier to say as RISE. Before I get started, I wanted to remind all of our listeners to visit our blog at regulatoryoversight.com, where you'll be able to listen to other episodes from not only this year, but past years, and also keep up to date on developments and changes as they occur. Today, I'm joined by my colleague, Christy Matelis, to discuss recent changes at the FTC and how those are going to influence enforcement. And I think it's kind of timely today as we record this. The FTC is back in session, coming back now that the budget has been signed, at least temporarily. So we could talk about what's coming forward in the next year. Christy, it'd be great if you say a little bit about your background.
Thank you, Clay. I'm excited to be here. And